All right, let's talk about some business voice. Basic concept of what made this a necessity over the past 100 years is that if a uh, group of employees working out of an office needed to conduct business, instead of doing so face to face, they could do so more efficiently by picking up a telephone and having conversations in order to conduct what business was needed. This gave rise to office buildings, and collections of office buildings gave rise to cities and the professional working class. So offices and the technology of being able to communicate voice has been the backbone to professional workforces for going on 100 years now. Initially, we had copper wires running to telephones on desks. It was a very expensive solution to run as technology began to advance, with the United States leading the way with Bell Labs and a few other locations. A very sophisticated and efficient network grew up, which eventually became run by a protocol called SS7. Just to give some comparison, if you want to send an IP packet across the internet from New York to Los Angeles, normally 25 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds is about what you would expect to have for that packet to get from one side of the country to the other. In the SS7 network, which was built long before the IP network, that could be done in like 4 milliseconds or 7 milliseconds. It was a very efficient, very fast network for sending voice around the country and around the world. So as technology began to advance, the cost of this technology began to drop, as is common, when you factor in Moore's law. And smaller companies began to be able to afford the cool features that the big boys had. These were called feature sets. You could buy it from the phone company for a pretty high fee, but there began to be developed ways of providing these same features, like hunting, hunt groups, where you put multiple lines together and you're able to have inbound calls to one number handled by multiple different voice paths, and hunt groups, voicemail, auto attendants, call waiting, other types of features like this. We're able to be provided, instead of from the phone company, from vendors, which provided a small plastic box that had a circuit board in it, and they're pretty commonly called pizza boxes. And then in a medium-sized business, there would be a 66 block that would provide telephone company central office lines that you would punch into, and then the pizza box would provide the features instead of the phone company. So you would save on your monthly bill and still get all the cool features. This became widely popular, the pizza box with pots. You could do faxing, you could do hunt grouping, you could do auto attendant, you could do voicemail with additional hardware, all kinds of things that these pizza boxes provided. In fact, if you were running a hotel, it was guaranteed that you had something like this sitting in your basement or first floor. Not uncommonly behind the front desk, there was a phone system that ran all the phones for the hotel, and this is how they did it. They didn't use the phone company, they used these little pizza boxes. When IP became a part of the national infrastructure, and it was reliable and ubiquitous, meaning it was everywhere, there was thought about, hey, well, maybe we could save money by just sending our voice over the IP network. And a lot of companies were founded on this principle. One company in particular called COVAD, COVAD, which is, let's see, compressed voice over data. COVID, I think, is how it's not related to the disease. There is actually a ISP company called COVID that provided an integrated voice and data solution. They kind of lost sight of that and they became just an ISP, but that was their um, initial uh, focus. Um, so there were protocols that were developed in order to see if there was a reliable way of providing voice over an IP network. This SCCP was developed by Cisco and was widely popular as the industry began. There was also one called MGCP, not as popular but pretty cool. It provided a way of controlling phones with a much more granular approach than the other ones. And then there was something called SIP. And SIP's job in life was just to set up the call. It would just set up a phone call and then it would let go and it'd say, okay, bye. It didn't configure telephones. It didn't provide the features. All SIP does is it sets up calls. You need something called a feature server in order to provide features using SIP. So SIP was just the protocol, and then you needed something called a feature server. All those together started to become more reliable, and really the turning point was when bandwidth that was available to businesses increased to the point where 10 calls or so can happen across a data circuit, and it wasn't going to cost $15,000 a month for that data circuit. The price of bandwidth started to drop, and so now we can start sending our voice across the data network. Companies called TISPs, or Internet Service Providers, but with a T at the beginning, meaning telephony internet service providers, began to crop up. They provided internet and they also provided voice. I worked for a couple of these over the past 15 years. Very popular approach, because if you're already providing the data, hey, how about if I provide you the voice also? It's good for you and it's good for me. And there was really good business model associated with that. In order to operate a telephony internet service provider, you needed something called the SBC, or a session border controller. I can remember going to the telecommunications trade show in Chicago. I think it was in 2005, where they were talking about SBCs becoming prominent for the first time. And price of SBCs came down to where businesses could start to purchase them and use them for their own uses. I'll get to that in a second. Also, a concept called IP centrics. So centrics is a what I was referring to before, where before the pizza boxes, the phone company provided the features to the handset. That's called centrics. IP-centrics is where those features are provided over an IP network. This is also called hosted IP telephony. So you don't have anything on in your business. All you have is a big data connection, and that data connection is providing you access to the internet, and it's also providing you your phone service. Very, very common. What began to change was the use of cell phones began to increase. And the way of saving money from voice over IP, which was an established business use case for 10 years plus, began to wane because people just simply weren't using telephones anymore. They were using their cell phones. And it turns out what was happening during this was some background wars were going on between the telephone companies. There was something called the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which provided competition to the telephone companies in what they believed to be an unfair approach. And for many years, they were hounded by laws that forced them to subsidize their competitors. Um, and eventually that ended. Colin Powell's son became the chair of the Federal Communication Committee, and the 1996 Telecommunication Act basically ended under his watch. And what was going on during that time, these telephony internet service providers were really starting to bite into the overall um, profits of telephone companies. People weren't using telephone lines anymore. They were just getting data circuits for their businesses and running voice over IP. No one was buying phone lines anymore. During that time, the cellular network began to burgeon, and Apple's iPhone became trendy, and people were using it. It was easy to use, and all that made the perfect storm that the phone companies were losing money because their copper lines weren't getting used, and they invested in cellular. It became very popular among the general population, and that caused voice over IP to start to wane. It's not as popular as it used to be. This is still very heavily used in businesses, but not as much. And the reason being is because people are walking around with cell phones. And so why do I need to have two phones? Why do I need to have a desk phone and a cell phone? And a lot of people are choosing just to not have a desk phone anymore. As a result of COVID, Zoom became a international fixture for collaboration. For businesses, Zoom lacks certain features for business collaboration. Collaboration tools have been around for 25 years. They've been slowly progressing and being perfected. And during the COVID quarantine, the concept of having a video call on Zoom. In fact, Zoom has become kind of like a Xerox term for making a copy. Now, if you have a video call, it's called a Zoom call. Has become commonplace and accepted. Microsoft has their suite of products centered around the brand Teams. And so what has happened now is that although cellular is still trying to survive, what seems like is going to happen is as 5G marketing holds cellular prominence in the general population, what's likely to happen is these collaboration applications are going to slowly start to take over. And the use of desk phones in order to have conversations from within an office with your colleagues and customers will slowly start to dissipate and be replaced with these collaboration applications. And those are fed voice and video services across IP backbones. That's generally what's been happening in business voice over the past 25 years or so, is that we went from just general central office served features to these pizza boxes to VoIP to cellular, and now these collaboration applications. And if you were starting a business, it really has to depend on whether or not your business is a certain size or not. If you're a smaller business, probably it makes sense to just stick with cellular for the time being until things change dramatically. What's likely going to happen is there's going to be disconnect from the concept of telephony using a phone number, and things will just coalesce into these collaboration applications. You won't have a phone number. You'll have either an email address or something, and you'll just collaborate and communicate across data networks, whether it be cellular or Wi-Fi, using the collaboration applications. But so cellular as a small business solution, and collaboration applications, if you're starting a new business, it probably makes sense to just use these collaboration applications. If you're larger enterprises and you can get away without putting desk phones. The reason being, it's a cost savings. This whole exercise of going down this road has been trying to save money. If I don't need to put a phone on every employee's desk, and I don't need to supply all those phones with voice services, my company can save a tremendous amount of money. So that's where these collaboration applications really start to shine. Just let everyone communicate using video. It's acceptable now. Everyone has it. Everyone's found a way of collaborating using video conferencing, and let that be the new norm. That being driven by cost savings. What needs to be thought through from a networking architect standpoint is how the network is going to be architected in order to support that. That's a much longer discussion than I was going to have for this video, but maybe we will at a later time.